So today we're going to learn about CSS layout. So remember, HTML is the content, CSS is the technology that we use to style our app, and part of styling your app is basically organizing the content in your app, right? Otherwise, you will only have paragraph and buttons and inputs that are all reading from top to bottom without much organization, just linear to the bottom, and some tables, right? So if you check our website from 1999, or maybe some a very old insurance company website, they will have this type of website. It's basically a table, and it has a left row and some middle content, and then a right column, right? That's a table. That's pretty basic. But if you check like modern web applications, you have basically things that are all over the place, right? You have content on the top, you have content on the right button. Like for example, these two buttons over here, right? How can I organize them to be always in that position, or this in this high position, right? So you can organize your application any way you want, and for that we use some CSS properties. So these CSS properties are applied to elements inside your HTML, right? So we are going to style elements inside the HTML. And usually the element that we style is this. It's a div, right? Why a div? Because a div doesn't have any semantics. It's just a square of content that you can basically put anywhere on your page, right? So this is I would say like the default or the most used tag to do this type of layouts, right? We will use a lot of divs. That doesn't mean that you can basically apply the same CSS properties to any other tags, right? You can use it with anchors, with images. You can use it with buttons, anything, right? You can have the same CSS properties, and the layout will still be maintained. Okay, now the first two properties, and I lined it out like this because I didn't want to forget any of this. The first two are, of course, width and height. These are pretty, self-described, like width and height, and they control exactly that, the width and height of your element. So you can have a div, and you can control that div, how wide and how tall it is, depending on that width and height properties. Now, by default, widths have, or divs, sorry, have the width of the containing space, right? So if you have the body of the page like this, and you put a div inside, that div by default will be the width of the page.
At 100%?
100%, essentially, right? But if you have some area, let's say for some reason we have a div that occupies, 400 pixels in the screen. And inside that div, we put another div, that div will be 100% of that area. So these by default always take 100% of whatever area they are contained, correct? Unless you change it with the width property. Now that doesn't mean that they can override its parent's size, right? Because if this this div is 400 pixels, and I say for this, okay, make it 800 pixels, right? The outer div will still be 400 pixels. The div with 800 pixels will basically overlap the container, right?
Will it create a slider?
No, unless you tell the container to basically create a slider. And for that, you have a couple other properties called overflow. So overflow is like the generic CSS property for that. And you can say overflow auto, and then it will be create a slider in whatever direction I'm overflowing. Or you can say overflow hidden, and this is basically everything that is outside my borders, just hide it, right? So these are two of the most common properties for overflow. Of course, you have overflow X, overflow Y. So you have overflowing different variants there. But yeah, that's what width and height control. Now, the width is easy. It's always 100% or a certain width. The problem is with the height, because the height of a container by default is the height of the content, right? If you have a container that doesn't have any content inside, then that container will be of height 0. So be essentially invisible in the page unless you put a border or something, right? So content 0 means invisible because it doesn't have anything inside, unless you put some text or some other elements that actually have content inside. Now, you have a div, and inside the div you have another div, and inside that you have another div, and here you have another div, right? What is the height of this div over here? Question? What do you think it will be the height of the parent container?
The size of the other div?
The width? The height. I'm talking about the height. It will be whatever height the children have, right? So if this and this is the height of the children, and this is the height of the children, and if this doesn't have anything, then it will be 0. So this div will be again 0, right? So that means that is the height of the children's inside, right? Make sense? If you put an A, like a letter A inside this, then now we have some height, and then the parent will have some height, and then the parent will have some height. Make sense? Cool. And the other issue is that height, when you set the height property, it works well with, so we have two types of measurements. One is percentage, and the other one is, well, percentage is described with the percent symbol. The other one is pixels or points. And these are like static, and the other are relative, right? So when you set the heights to pixels, that works 100% of the time, right? If you say 100 pixels, that will be the height of the container, of the div, or whatever the element. Now, you said 50%, that's a problem, because it's 50% of what, right? The screen, no, it's not 50%, right? So be careful when you put heights with percentage, because that usually don't work. And this is kind of like the basis of a common problem that we have, and you probably see it around in memes. It's like how to align or how to center a div vertically, right? That's a very common issue. Well, at least was a common issue in styling things in CSS, because I mean styling a div or centering a div is pretty easy. It's just you say whatever size, whatever width you want. Let's say this is with 100 pixels, and then you can say margin auto. Margin auto is the margin, it will be automatically set, right? So it will be automatically set from the left, automatically set from the right. That's it. Now, when you set the height, that's a problem, because the margin auto doesn't work vertically, right? Because it doesn't know how long the page is. Remember, the web pages are not created for a screen, an interface, like a rectangular screen interface. It's created for documents. So CSS doesn't know, or the HTML doesn't know how long the document will be, so there is no way to calculate that, right? So when you try to do this, let's say 100 pixels, and you still have that margin auto, this div will show up here on the top of the screen. It will not be centered vertically, right? That was a common issue with CSS. So how to center a div vertically? You probably find a lot of solutions online, or a lot of people commenting around this online. And it's basically because the height cannot be calculated, and because the height cannot be calculated, then you don't know, right? Now, there is ways around that in terms of getting the height of the screen, but I don't think it will be necessary after we learn Flexbox. So let's move on to the next properties. Questions about width and height? No? Cool. By the way, only use static, when I say static, it's pixels. If you are making something that is pixel perfect, like if you have a design that says this should be 32 pixels, in that case you use pixels. Otherwise, you have to try to use percentages or something that are approximations of that most of the time, because it will help you create interfaces that adjust to any screen size. Remember, I'm using a laptop with probably a screen size, and then you have a computer that has a different screen size. You've probably seen some people that has like big ass screens that have like 32 inches, and then you put your interface there, and it's just like this in the center of the screen, right? You don't like that. You will like your design to flow with the screen size. Make sense? So try to use percentages, unless your design requires to be exact in terms of pixels.
So if you were creating a output that you needed to print, and you wanted it to show the exact page breaks
Exactly.
of a fixed size, 8.5 by 11,
Mhm.
you then determine what you did and make it pixels.
Exactly. In that case, yes. Or, for example, here, you see this interface over here? No matter the screen size, this interface here on the top will be always the same width and height, right? In that case, that requires pixels. But the positioning, I don't know, maybe not, this is not a good, let's say if I open GitHub. So for example here, this in this interface, all the sizes are probably percentages. So when I put this in a smaller screen, it gets adjusted. Actually, it's not doing that. Well, you get the point. It's just basically try to make your app work for most of the screens. Okay, so we have another CSS property. We have the position property. Now, position controls where the element will be positioned in the screen, right? By default, all elements have the static position. And the static position means whatever is the design, like the original flow of the document, that's what the element should show. Now, we also have two more that I really think you should use if one is absolute. We also have fixed and relative. So absolute is basically controlling how the element can be moved out of its static position, right? So for example, and fixed means whatever I'm doing with the rendering of the screen, fixed means relative to the screen size. So for example, these elements on the bottom right, they are fixed. So whatever my screen say, whatever happens on the screen, those two elements will still be there, right? It's fixed to the bottom right of the screen. Same with these two; they are fixed to the to the top left, to the top right. So that's what fixed means. Now, by default, we don't pay too much attention about positioning unless you really need to change how an element, I would say, how can you position an element outside of its default positioning. Giving you an example of a position like this, for example, this is fixed. You see the left section here? When I move the screen, it's still fixed to the left. That's what's fixed. Right? Or have you seen these websites that have like a chat box on the bottom? Right? That's also fixed. Right? It's fixed to the bottom of the screen. Another example of fixed. Absolute. Let me give you an example of absolute that I tend to use. You've probably seen, like, for example, in some websites, they have like your avatar, right? It's like a picture with your name in it, or maybe your initials, right? But in the corner, well, not this, in the corner, what is the, 4. in the corner they have your notification counter, right? Like 2, and this is like a red thing. So how do you manage to take an element and overlap it with another element and then move it a little bit to a different position? For that you can use absolute. So you can make this div absolute and put it inside this div and then say, okay, move it. And the way you move it is with these 4 properties: top, bottom, left, and right. So these 4 properties control how much space they have from the top, from the bottom, from the left, and from the right. So if I want to put it on the top right, I would say top 0, right 0. Right? And that means, and position absolute, of course. So that will mean that this element will move top 0, so no space on the top, right 0, no space on the right, so it will be right there square. If I put left 0 and bottom 0, what do you think it will happen? It will be aligned to all the edges, right? So it will basically be like this. It will overlap the other one. Okay? Got it? Questions? Now there is this is used, like this trick is used if you want to create a div that basically uses your whole screen, right? Because that bottom is relative to the screen. So if you create a div that basically has these 4 properties, and you have a screen like this, maybe not pink, but like this, then your div will be exactly covering the whole screen. Make sense? And then inside that div, you can do whatever you want, right? You can start aligning scenes to the left, to the right, to the top, to the bottom. You can do whatever you want with that. So that's a trick that I see in some websites do, right? So because the thing is, remember, websites are created for documents, but we are not creating documents, we're creating interfaces. And an interface, there is some listings, but you can control how the list works, right? But you want to control all the aspects of your application. So you want to have control of all the areas of your application. So you can put anything in any position of your screen, right? So using something like that, I've seen that it works very well, right? Because now you have, yes, go ahead.
You could, let's say, take a map of a county,
Mm-hmm.
put it as an image inside your larger div, and then you can place absolute positions for different elements, put a hyperlink on them,
Mm-hmm.
so you can then click on them as someone hovers over them to get more information of that item.
Yes, you can do that too. Now, for maps, there's other technologies that help you with that. But yeah, it's something that you can do, yeah. You can do it, for example, like let's say I'm doing this and I put a map, like a real map library. So that means that this div is just a map, right? That means that on top of that map, I can put all my UI, right? And you've probably seen this before. This is Google Maps, right? Google Maps does exactly like that. It just puts a map in the whole screen, but that screen doesn't have scroll. The screen is right there. It doesn't move. Like, let's go. Google Chrome Maps, right? It's the square of the screen, and I can move around it, and I can position interfaces around the page. I mean the screen, but there is no the zoom. The scroll. There is no scroll. That's what I'm saying, right? The interface is the whole screen. So that's what they're probably doing here. They're just using the whole screen, they're putting something there that says, okay, this is my whole screen, and then on top of that, I will create my interface, right? So we don't have scroll because it's not a document again. It's just an interface. Cool. Questions? No? Cool. Let's go to the next property. So position, and then we have display. Now display controls how this element behaves, okay? And this is the most important one because node element, and you probably noticed this before, node element behave the same way. So you have the inline elements, right? These are your text, your span, your B tags, you know, like the ones that control the strong. What else doesn't behave? I think images as well. So there are some tags that you can inline. That means that they flow with the like text, right? You can start writing text and they flow like text. And when you have text, they are not usually square. Like for example, here, let me see if I can see. Well, I don't have an element like that. So basically they flow with the text. It's different like the other type of property is block. And these are your typical div and I think P's and H1, well, P probably is a paragraph. Yeah, P's are blocks and I mean tables, of course. And these elements basically behave like squares. Like they cannot be, by default, they are not aligned next to another. They basically take the whole width and you have to stack them, right? Because they are blocks. Now these are the two most common properties for display, inline and block. The other one is none. And of course, what do you think this does to an element? Hides it, exactly. But hides it in a way that removes it from the screen, right? It removes it from the document, at least visually. That means that if you have two elements, right? If you have an element here, and you have another element here, and another one here, and you say to this one, okay, block, these two will collapse, right? Because there is nothing in there now. The element is still in memory, and it has a CSS property that says display none, so everything will collapse around it. It's not like there is another property in CSS called visibility, and you can say visibility hidden, and this means, okay, it's there, but it's not showing, right? And it doesn't collapse. So there's a difference between display none, and visibility hidden, okay? Cool, we don't care about this now. So we have these three, inline, block, and none. Now the one that we care about is this, flex. Okay, because that's the one that we're gonna use to style pretty much all our layouts, right? So when we're creating layouts, we're gonna use the display flex property. And you probably use it in the postcard on Friday, without knowing how much about how that works, right? But today we're gonna learn. So that's the display property in a nutshell. And we get to Flexbox. Okay, so Flexbox. Flexbox was created not that long ago, actually, probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, but not that long. What I'm saying is that websites from 2000s didn't have Flexbox. They basically have a bunch of tables. That's why websites, like all the websites, look so bad, right? So Flexbox was created to basically solve this problem because it was really a problem when we wanted to create like more modern interfaces. It was really hard to lay the elements in a modern design. and then we created Flexbox. And I will explain now how Flexbox works with my own words. And we will work with this because it's really complex. It took me some time to understand it, so bear with me. So Flexbox works with two things. First is the container, right? So we need a container. Of course, a container is just a div, right? Don't think about it as a different thing, but we call this div the container. It could be a div, it could be a paragraph, it could be anything. We're going to use divs. So we have a container, and then we have items that we want to somehow organize inside that container. Okay? So that's the problem that we want to solve. How can we organize these items? Okay? Now, Flexbox works by creating two axes. One is the main axis. By default, the main axis goes like this. It's a horizontal axis, right? And a cross axis. And the cross axis goes like this. So, horizontal axis, main axis, and of course in the opposite direction is the cross axis. Why these axes are important, and you can control the direction of this axis, is because elements will align in the direction of that main axis. Okay? By default, and you probably saw it when you were doing the postcard exercise, when you had something like this. You have a div. I think the div was the name, the postcard body, right? Class. So this was the postcard, I would call it PC body. And then inside you have a div with a class. It was left side and right side, if I remember correctly, right? A. Okay, so you had this in the postcard exercise. Remember this section, the body? Now, when the first time that you see this section render, it was basically a div using the whole width of the car, because the car had a width of 400, if I remember correctly. So it had a width of 400, and then there were two divs, the left and the right, just like this. That's the default display and position of divs. Basically, they stack, because they are blocks, they stack on top of each other, and they use the whole width of the container. Now, when we said to this PC body, okay, PC body, now you are a flex container. So display flex. One important thing is we apply the display flex property to the container, right? We want to be able to align stuff inside the container. So display flex goes in the container. Automatically, by default, the direction of the Flexbox is horizontal. So that means that these two divs, now they say, okay, boom, and boom, one next to the other. And the other thing is that they, come on, how can I, yeah. Now, first of all, they are horizontal, right? Because by default, the direction of a flex is in that direction, horizontal, in a row, basically. Now, the width of the items changes as well. Now, they are no longer full width. They are the width of the content inside. So everything inside, all the items, and this we call these containers, and we call these items. So all the items will take the width and height of their content. So, and that's why you saw something like this. You saw something like they were really small, right? Initially, they were really small because they didn't have any content. As soon as you put some content inside, they have some width, right? So that's the way Flexbox work by default. Now, how can we modify this? There is a lot of properties that we can apply to the container and to the items, so we can modify the behavior on how they appear in the container. The first property is the direction. So for container, on the container, the first thing that we can apply is the direction. We can change the direction of the Flexbox using the property flex direction. And we have several options here. We have row, that's the default. We have column. Of course, everything will look in a column. And we have row reverse, and of course, column reverse. Right? Now, row reverse, so by default is row, right? But if we put row reverse, the items that are in that direction, they will appear in the same, it will be aligned to the left, of course, but they will be in the different order, right? It will be B first and then A. It doesn't matter in what order you have it in the HTML, because the row reverse will make them appear in a different order, right? It's very uncommon to use it, but you know what row reverse means. Now, that's the first thing, the direction. Now, the direction controls what direction is the main axis. So if I make my main axis, so this is row. If I make my main axis a column, shit, come on. Okay, a column, then my elements will be stack. 1 and 2. Okay, because I'm using a column. Make sense? So in whatever direction, and the cross axis is the opposite direction. So you have main axis, cross axis. And in here, well, let me show the main axis a little bit bolder so you know what I mean here. So there's the main axis, cross axis. If I say column, then this will be the main axis, and this will be the cross axis. Okay? And we will learn why the cross axis is important in a second. But you get the idea, right? That's the direction. Flex direction row, flex direction column. Cool. Now, the second property that we want to use here is justify content. So how the content is organized inside that container on the direction of the main axis. Okay? Now, by default is flex start. That's why all the elements start on the left. But there is a lot of properties that we can use here, and one of the properties is space between. Space between means that all the elements will align in a way that they will use all the space of the container, right? If I have more items here, the other item will be right in the middle. Right in the middle. They will be spaced evenly using all the space available in the container. If I have more, let's say I have another element, they will space. Right? So evenly. Now, let's say we have 3 elements. There's another property here called space around. Space around is similar, but it will keep space around the edges as well. So it will be even with the edges, right? Never seen this apply in practice, but it's fine. And of course you have center. And center means all of the items are, they don't have any space between them, and they are all in the center of the container. In whatever axis, that's the nice part about this. It's like, if we say, okay, this is a row, and they are all aligned, and they are all justified to the center, all the elements will be on the center. But if I change the axis, and I have a div that is this size, right? Oof. Okay, if I have a div that is this size, and I say, okay, justify center, these two will show up here. And this is essentially centering vertically, right? Whatever the height of this, whatever the height of the container, and I say flex direction column, justify content center, that's in the center of the screen. Make sense? Cool. Now, that's the justify content property. We also have an align items property, and this controls the same, but for the cross axis. So we also have a center here, right? And that center will control how things will align in the cross axis. So if I do center and center, boom, my elements will all be piled up in the center of the container. In whatever direction I specify, if I say it's a column, they will be in a column inside the container. If I say it's a row, they will be in a row inside the container, right? Because I'm controlling how they will appear in the main axis and how they will appear in the cross axis, okay? Now with this, I mean, some other properties, now you see that you can basically, anything is possible in terms of laying out stuff. Okay, there's some edge cases that we will see later, but yeah. Now for containers, that's the main properties that we have. For items, we have a couple more properties. The main one are bases. I will not get too much into details about this, but we have flex basis, flex shrink, and flex. What's the other one that we use a lot? Flex shrink, flex basic, and flex. Sorry, I need to see it. Grow. Okay, these three. And these three controls the width or the height, depending on the width. Actually, well, the width of the height, because if I am in a row flexbox, that's the width. If I in a column flexbox, that's the height, right? So it depends on what direction the main axis is. But for example, flex basis is the size. It's like setting width or height, depending. That's why it's basis. It's not width or height, because it doesn't make sense. So if I want to have something like this, let's say I want to create a 2-column layout, and I have this column to be 30% and this column to be 40%, right? So I can create a container as a flex box, flex direction row, and to the first div I can say, okay, the flex basis is 30%. So it will be 30% of that container, and then of that item. And then to the other item, I can say flex basis 70%. Or to the second one, I can say flex grow 1. And that's like a weight system. And let me explain. If I have flex basis 1 and 1, oh, sorry. If I do flex grow 1 and 1, they both will have the same weight, right? So they will be 50-50 exactly in the screen. Now, if you want to give more weight to one of the two, you put a 2 on the, yes?
And which is the difference by using, for example, width 30%?
It will still apply, right? Because you're setting the width, and width will still work in that scenario. Now, I think flex basis works in whatever. The thing for flex basis is that, remember, in a row,
Yeah.
it will be the weight, the width. But in in a
Okay.
column will be the height. Now the issue with that, with that 30% is that you don't want to use. Let me explain. You don't want to use this type of things because you can use Flexbox very well to create mobile or responsive designs, right? A responsive design will have, for example, two things next to each other in a desktop, but they will look one on top of the other in a mobile, right? And if you say, okay, this is 50% and this is 50%, when they go to mobile, now these two are 50% half of the screen and the other is 50% half of the screen, right? So that's bad. But if you give them both Flex Grow 1, and you say, okay, this is a row, but in mobile it's a column, they will still 1 and 1, and they will still fit like 100% of the width. You see where I'm going? So that's why you try to use, when you use Flexbox, try to use the Flexbox property. I think they will have the best result when you're trying to lay out stuff, right? To be honest, Flex Grow, I don't use it as much. Like, honestly, I don't remember the last time I used a Flex Grow. And shrink is because, and you see, the issue with grow is that if you have content, let's say you have, these two are the same weight, so 1 and 1, that means 50%. But I have way more text here on the left side than on the right side. Then the content on the right, on the left, will be bigger, and the 50% rule will not apply, right? So that's why you need Flex Shrink. And Flex Shrink means how much can I shrink? You said 0, that means don't shrink. And then it will respect the 50-50. This is basically created for some scenarios when you need your design to flow in a certain way, right? Not very common, again. So if you feel the need of managing how much something grows or shrinks, depending on the content inside, then you need Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. It's not very common. I think this is like an over-engineering of the people that design Flexbox, right? Because in 99% of the time, you're just using Flex bases at much, and then just organizing stuff with the container. Cool? Now, these are a couple more properties here. One is order, basically control the order. So even in the HTML, HTML things have an order. You can control in what order an element moves based on that property, order. So you can say order 0, and that will be top. That element will be the first, no matter what, right? Sometimes it helps, I don't know. Depends on your design. And yeah, that's it. That's Flexbox. Pretty much, that's all we need for Flexbox. Now, how do we gonna learn a little bit more about Flexbox? And we wanna use this Flex Froggy. Go there. Flex Froggy. It won't take you more than 15 minutes to do it. But it will give you a very good insight of how Flexbox works. Yes, oh, sorry. So you see here, by the way, this is not for us to make now. I just want to go through some exercises, and then we can move on with the class. But this is an example, right? You have 24 exercises, and the pawn is the container, right? That blue area on the right, that's the container. And the items are the frogs, right? You need to move the frog inside the container. Okay? Now, you see I'm styling the pawn. You see on the left, you have dash pawn, display flex. I know that my pawn is a flex container. Now, what's the property that I have to apply to move the frog to the leaf. In this case, we need to use justify content. And you can see the options that you have there. So justify content center. Well, that's not the one. Flex N. And there you go. So items will align all to the right in a flex box that is basically a row, right? Flex N means everything will start at the end. Oh, it's in Spanish in my, so hopefully you understand what I'm saying. Well, you have it in English, of course. Okay. Same thing. Now let me go to a more complex one. 18. Actually, not this. Let's do this. Okay. So in this case, we need to apply two styles. And you can see here that the pawn by default is a row. So that's why the frogs are in a row. But I need to change the direction. And then once I change the direction, I need to change how the contents are aligned in that direction, right? So first, I need to change the direction to column. And then I need to change the, which one do you think I should apply? Justify content or align items? Which one?
Trying to get them all in the same row.
I'm trying to get it all at the bottom.
Align.
Align items? Justify content, because justify content aligns in the main axis, and we change the main axis to be a column. So remember, main axis is justify content. Cross axis is align items. So in this case, should be justify content. Oops. And that will be flex N. There you go. Let's see an example of both directions. Oh, this is a good one. Okay. What direction do you think I need to apply here? And how do I organize it? Well, you know it's justify content, so just
Change the order of the frogs, right?
well, they are.
It should be reversed, right?
It's a reverse order, yeah. So flex direction should be what? Column, I think it's column reverse or reverse column. Well, column reverse. Notice that if I say column, check this out. If I say column, they will be on the top. It will be a column, right? And all the items, look, from here I went to here, right? Now it's a column. But actually I need them to be reversed, starting from the bottom, right? The green column should be the last one. So then it will be column reverse. And now how do I align them? Justify content. So they are spread across the main axis.
Space between.
Space between. Now check space around. You see space around. The space around property is really, it's nice because you see that the space between one frog and the other is even to the edge. So every frog has some space around it, right? That is equal. Same, up to the edge. Now if I do space between, now it's spread using the edges. Got it? Cool. Well, this is a very fun exercise to learn a little bit more of Flexbox. I know it helped me because I really struggle with the whole justify content align items thing. Like I never knew, oh, this is justify or align, and now it's like, oh, it's main axis, cross axis. That's pretty easy to remember, and Flexbox Froggy helps with that. So keep it around. I will share it on the Slack channel so you can do it later. Cool. Questions? And let me stop this session here.